Well, welcome to QX Church. Find us online at qxchurch.org. This is Pastor Scott Conway. Now, for those listening on audio who aren't here physically present or aren't watching the video, I have a board I'll be writing on. I'll be describing what I'm doing, hopefully well enough that you have some idea what I'm talking about. We're going to talk about love today, the mechanics of love and relationship. Now, the foundation of love is what the Bible calls agape, or agapeo. But agape is an unconditional love. And 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 4 through 8 breaks that down. Now, we have a 24-lesson, about an hour a lesson program that breaks that out in incredible detail. So if you want to understand unconditional love, that's the program. Now, how many times do you need to listen to that program before you have mastered it? I couldn't tell you. I'm not there yet. How many times do you even have to teach the program before you've mastered it? Still couldn't tell you because I've taught the program and I haven't mastered it. This is something you always get better at. This is a compass heading. All relationship skills, all love skills, all character skills are what we call compass heading goals. Now, what a compass heading goal means simply is that there is no ultimate destination. But from wherever you are, you can always find a direction you can go. You can wake up in the morning and know, I can be more loving today than I was yesterday. I can be loving in a different way today than I was yesterday. No matter how good you are at something, having something in your life that is a compass heading goal is incredibly helpful. As a martial arts master, mastery is a compass heading goal. There's no place in martial arts where now you know everything, now you've mastered everything. There's nothing more to get better at. There's nothing more to know. It's the same thing with love. It's the same thing with relationship. It's the same thing with a lot of areas of your life. On top of agape, we have phileo. Now, phileo love is the conditional love. Sometimes it's called brotherly love. Some people think it is an inferior love because it is conditional. But we're going to get into that in a moment. And then on top of that, we have eros. Now, eros, technically speaking, it does have to do with a physical attraction. But part of what we're talking about with that spark, that attraction, that chemistry, that energy, it's the excitement. It's the experiential part of a relationship. And so when you expand your understanding of eros to that, it's those moments, it's those high points. It's that attraction, that draw to things, which doesn't have to necessarily be a sexual attraction. It can be the way someone feels about like a totally awesome hot car, or the way someone feels about a great vacation. Anything that excites you, anything that gets this chemical reaction out of you, we toss into this category. But we have this phileo love. What is this phileo love, and why do I say that the phileo love, this conditional love, is in no way inferior to the agape love? Because that's how we make distinctions. So if I am going to agape everybody on the planet, because it's unconditional, I am going to agape you the same no matter who you are, because agape is character-based. When it says love is patient, everybody gets the same patience from me because I have a certain amount of patience built into my character, a certain amount of patience that I've developed. Some people will use it up faster, some people will use it up slower. Some people have enough proximity to me to use it up more often. Some people don't have proximity to me, and I can be infinitely patient with them because I hardly ever see them. It's easy to be patient with someone you never have the need to be patient with, right? And then when you're with people and you're around them constantly and you need to exercise your patience, they can use it up. Love is kind. Everyone has a certain amount of innate kindness or innate unkindness. And if someone has a certain amount of kindness, some people can use it up and some people can even feed it. And by the way, this is the classic line, if a man is kind to you but unkind to the waiter, he is not a kind person. That means his kindness is not based on character. His kindness is based upon, I want something from you. So it is a behavior they engage in to get something. It is not a part of their character. And those are two different kinds of kindness. One is a bit of salesmanship, and the other one is actual character. And so when you're dealing with this agape, This unconditional love, that's how that works. That's based on your character. And so I am not going to agape my wife any more than I agape a friend. Why? Because it's based on my character. My character does not change when I'm with my wife versus when I'm with my friend versus when I'm with a class full of kids versus when I'm traveling versus when I'm dealing with the waiter. My character is the same. It's me. That's the agape. But we have relationships. And the way we distinguish between relationships is with this phileo. And if you want to spell that, that's Phileo. This phileo is how we make a distinction between I like you more than I like that person. And so if I'm looking to hang out with someone this weekend, who you're going to want to hang out with are the people you phileo the most. The people you're going to want to not hang out with are the people you phileo the least, or maybe the ones you have a negative phileo relationship with. Now, sometimes, like in our family, ideally, you all love your family. You know, you love your aunts, your uncles, your parents, your nephews and nieces. You love them. But when they get together at the holidays, are there sometimes someone you may love that you kind of really don't want to spend a lot of time with? That you know you're going to show up with the agape. You're going to have a certain amount of patience, a certain amount of kindness, a certain amount of character to show up with. But there just seems to be certain people, maybe you're related to, maybe you have an agape relationship with, but the phileo relationship could be a negative relationship. And you're really not looking forward to being with them. You wouldn't go out of your way to be with them because they drain you. Has anybody ever run into someone like that in your life? And so if over the weekend you were looking for someone to go hang out with, if you're heading out of town and you're looking for a buddy to go travel with, maybe to go fishing with, maybe to go shopping with, whatever it is you like to do, are there people in your life you really would not want to hang out with for that much time? It's because of a lack of phileo. But we're going to talk a bit about how phileo works. With something, when you're dealing with feelings, it's kind of interesting to consider math. We're going to talk about the phileo bank account and a little bit about how phileo works. Now, phileo works on a concept called association. Now, the very, very basic, when you have positive interaction, it elevates the phileo. When you have negative interaction, it debits the phileo. And so you think about it as an exchange of money. I mean, most people can grasp the idea of a bank account. When you make deposits, your bank account goes up. When you make withdrawals, your bank account goes down. And the way an association works is associations generally are positive or negative. Sometimes they're neutral, and so it doesn't really affect anything one way or another. And what falls into each category, here's the challenge, can vary from person to person because it depends upon what their reference point is. Some people build the kind of associations where they're so used to being treated badly that being treated badly has a nominal negative effect on them. But if you're kind to them, even just a little bit, in the middle of even a toxic, abusive relationship, they just glom onto that. Some people are so used to being treated well that they expect to be treated well so much that when something doesn't go the way they believe it ought to go in the relationship they have, that is a huge negative. And what can be interesting is if you have one of these people accustomed to be treating badly and one of these people accustomed to be treated well, interacting with one another, they could have what is actually a fairly neutral interaction by an objective outside observer, and the person accustomed to be treating well, he's expecting pluses. And the person who's accustomed to be treating badly, he's expecting minuses. And then this neutral to the person accustomed to be treating badly actually ends up being a plus. And the person accustomed to be treating well ends up being a minus. So if someone shows up at a store and they're used to being ignored, they're used to even being treated badly, they're used to being kicked out of the store, and they find that they show up at the store and everyone just ignores them. Or they're used to being harassed, they're used to being followed, they're used to being watched, they're used to being challenged or questioned. And now all of a sudden they're being ignored. Like, yeah, it's okay for you to be here. Why would I bother with you? If you want to buy something, I'm over here. Someone who's used to being treated badly then will see being ignored as a plus. Someone who's used to being treated well, someone who's used to having a clerk come up and say, What can I do to help you? Can I show you anything? And they're used to that. And then if you say, no, I'm just looking, and you back off, and they're used to that, and they're used to excellent customer service, and you just ignore them when they walk in. To them, that's terrible service. To them, that's a negative experience. And we can all understand that in retail. We can understand that at a store. Regular relationships work the same way. Someone who's used to being mistreated, someone who's used to being behaved badly against, will glom on to anything positive or even just not negative as a positive. Someone who's accustomed to treating well, someone who's accustomed to honor and respect, will tend to treat negatively the simple lack of those positive things. And so as we're building our concept of associations, one of the basic things to understand is that associations can be specific to the individual. Something else to understand about associations is sometimes associations can be exactly backwards. Here's another example. Has anyone ever met anyone who smokes? Most of us have. When someone smokes, do they think like, well, I would like to knock off 4 minutes of my life. Let me go have a cigarette. I would like to increase my risk of lung cancer. Let me go have a cigarette. Is there objectively, especially from a medical standpoint, anything positive about using smoking as a solution? Then when you consider the chemical content of cigarettes, is there anything in cigarettes that would make you relax? No. If anything, it should wind you up tighter. It's a lot like drinking coffee to relax. It's like, oh, I'm wound too tight. I'm too jittery. I need to have a cup of coffee to relax. Biochemically, that's a lot of what's going on. And yet, how many people know someone who has taken cigarettes and completely reversed the association so much that they can smoke a cigarette and relax? They can smoke a cigarette, they can inhale smoke and feel better. Alcohol is a depressant. Biochemically, if you drink alcohol, it should kind of like slow you down, put you to sleep. How many people have ever seen anyone use alcohol as a stimulant? To loosen up, to have fun, to get energized. We do that all the time. Again, that is reversing, biochemically reversing the association. And so sometimes you get this, you see it with children. Sometimes children are so starved for attention that to feel important, they will do negative things to get your attention because they would rather have negative attention to feel important enough that they can anger you, important enough that something in their behavior gets a reaction out of you. It gets your attention. And that tells them, at least I'm that important. That they will behave badly to get your attention. And that negative attention, being punished, being sent to the room, being put on timeout, being yelled at, screamed at, even spanked, is better to them than being ignored. And that's another reversal where they begin to associate being punished means I'm important. I'm getting attention. And that's how I get attention. That's how I have to behave to get somebody's attention. So if you understand associations, the obvious ones to go forward. I mean, if you have a great time together, that's a plus. If you have a pleasant experience together, that's a plus. If you do something for someone that they like, that's a plus. But sometimes these flip, and you understand that sometimes these flip. That helps you grasp association much better. Now, when we're working with the Philaio bank account, there is a math equation here. And that's positive equals a number. Negative, and I'm doing a capital N, so P equals N. Negative equals the number, whatever the number is, and it'll be a negative number. And then we're going to do a plus 1. And then we're going to do this times 4. So say if you do something positive, we'll just use a 1 to 4 scale here on both sides. So if you do a positive thing, and the positive thing, it's a simple compliment. You know, it's a hug. It's, a pat on the back. It's an attaboy, whatever it is, a wahoo. And you say you do a 2-point plus. That 2-point plus is going to get you 2 points. You just put 2 points in your Philaio bank account with that person. They have a positive association. If you've done something awesome together, and you have this connection to awesome together, that we are together as partners in awesome, that could be a 4-point thing. And we'll talk about chunking in a little bit. But here's the part I want you to get. On a negative thing, suppose you have a negative interaction. And remember how association works. What's positive and negative is at least in part subjective. If you have a negative interaction with somebody, we'll say it's a 2-point negative interaction. Well, we do 2 plus 1. So now we have a 3-point negative interaction times 4. And that just took 12 points out of the Phileo bank account. So imagine if every time you go to the bank, you go to deposit $200. Bank account goes up by $200. And you continue to make deposits. You have thousands of dollars in the bank. But then at some point you need to spend some of this money. So you go to the bank to get out $200 and say, okay, here's your $200. And you look at your bank balance and they have debited you $1,200. That's not fair. If that were a bank with dollars, that would not be fair. But that's the way Phileo works. That's the way Phileo works. You can put in 2 with a positive 2, but if you do a negative 2, you're going to lose 12. And if you understand that ratio, you understand so much that that is how that works. You know you can't have a relationship where you say, well, on balance, it's about even. Yeah, I do a bunch of negatives, but I balance it out with good stuff. If it is balanced, that the plus 2, minus 2 as a balance, you don't end up with 0, you end up at negative 10. Can you see how quickly that kills a relationship? Now let's look at a very beginning part of a relationship. Suppose it's a store. First time you've walked into the store. And the first time you walk into the store, you have a negative experience at the store. Or you have a negative experience at this restaurant. Maybe the food's not good. Maybe the person who's there reacts against you for some reason. It might not even be the owner. I mean, it could be someone who just works there, and you don't know. They could have gotten fired for it. But the only association you have to this business is negative. Do you go back there again if you have other alternatives? The vast majority of people would not, unless there's a reason you need this particular store. If there's that store and there's another one across the hall, you'll go to the one across the hall. You'll go somewhere else. You won't go back to that same person because the only emotional association you have is negative, right? Most of us do this. If the very first time you have a dish, it tastes terrible, how many times are you going to try that dish? Most people, never again. You'll have something else. And so just understanding this part is enormously powerful. Now, I had mentioned chunking. Now, chunking or unchunking, or something I call unpacking. So chunking is when you take many items and you make it into one bigger item. And then unpacking or de-chunking is when you take one item. Whoop, that pen's fading. When you take one item and you're going to break that out into several items. An example I often use with this is vacation. Suppose you had a great vacation. Some of us just came back from in town or from out of town, and suppose you say, oh, that was a great trip. That was awesome. 4-point trip. Or you could break it out in pieces. Go, okay, we got this big 4-point box. If you break that out, say, oh, yeah, we had a good trip to Circus Circus. 2 points. Like, oh, it was really cool getting to see the gun store. That's worth another point. The zombie apocalypse store, that's a couple of points there. Got a hangout swimming. That was a good point. We got good shawarma, point for shawarma, point for Uber mac and cheese, point for barbecue. And you could actually start adding all this up, and instead of getting 4 points for one single chunked awesome, you could break it out into pieces emotionally. Think about them as separate pieces, and you could end up making this into a 20 or even a 50 or even a 100-point plus. If that's the way you choose to think about it. If that's the way you naturally think about it. Now, by the way this can get worse is I was talking to a woman in this particular case. about vacations. Now, she had had a lot of fabulous vacations. If you broke them out individually, I don't know, there might have been a dozen and a half great vacations. Some of them a few days, some of them a week, some of them 2 weeks, some of them 3 weeks, some of them including cruises, resorts, shows, shopping. Some of these vacations were pretty staggering in just how amazing they were. But when I was talking to her about, what's one of the best things going on in your marriage? And she said, well, we've had a lot of great vacations. And she kind of lit up at the idea of vacations. She said, well, tell me about some of these vacations. They were great. Well, what she's doing is she's chunking. She's taken Alaska, Hawaii, the Bahamas, Las Vegas, Orlando, cruises, and she's shoving all of them into one box that had a maximum value of 4. So all I did is I helped her take her 4 and start unpacking it, and pretty instantly turned the 4 into a 20. And you should have seen the way that light up started to just kind of permeate things. And then over the course of time, my recommendation was, good, now that we've unpacked it to several of your most spectacular vacations, now on your own, start to take some of these most spectacular vacations and begin to unpack those. And if she did that, she would begin to find that she had a pretty spectacular life by anchoring to those vacations. That she had a lot to be grateful for by anchoring to all of the individual pieces of those vacations. And that if she did that, she would find the overall quality of life would be dramatically elevated. So that's part of how chunking and de-chunking works, or unpacking. Now, one more piece in this, before we go into a more generic discussion on it to understand. So that's the positive and the negative and whatnot. Is the power of the mind. And we're going to use memory and anticipation. When you anticipate something, when you expect something, that has about 1/8 the power. When you remember something, that has about 1/8 the power. So the mind operates about 1/8 the real experience. So when you are expecting something to be a certain way, you will have the emotional response equal to about 1/8 of the reality. So if I tell my kids, we're going to Disneyland, and they have a framework for what Disneyland means, or if they've never been to Disneyland, they have this emotional idea that, I don't know what this is, I've never been there, but I know it's awesome. Every time they reflect on that, I'm getting a plus 1/8 of the Disneyland points, at whatever level they're experiencing it. Now, by the way, this is part of why some people lie. This is part of why some people promise things they know they can't deliver. They want to start accumulating these points. And if you can get your kid to associate strongly, we're going to Disneyland. That's another 1/8 of a point. After a while, you finally get to your plus 1 point, and you feel like, I've got my credit for doing it. Well, here's something that sometimes people who do the lies and the deceit and the last-minute cancellation don't know. And the biblical concept, the proverb is, hope deferred makes a heart sick. This builds hope. I'm going to bump that one back there. So these pluses are building the hope. The reason you get these bonus points in anticipation is because they are pre-experiencing what they're going to get. Well, then when they don't get it, that positive suddenly turns into a negative. And then what happens is instead of getting your pluses, all of a sudden, say if it was just that plus 1, you've built up 8 times of anticipation at a total association level, you got your plus 1 point. That plus 1 turns into a minus 1. And we know from Phileo bank account, that means that's a minus 2 times 4. You just lost 8 points. You spent your time lying to get your free point. To use words instead of action to try to get a point. And then you don't follow through on the words. And you end up with a negative 8. You lost 7 points. Now, some people might look at that. I mean, the more, deceitful types of, oh, well, I know what my solution is. I just need to keep adding up all of these 1/8 points. So then I'm up to a +2 or a +3, and then I'm at a +3. Then I'm good, right? Well, no, because then when you do the hope deferred, you will make their heart sick. That +3 that you got suddenly goes from the 3, so -3 turns into -4, and that's going to be times 4. You lost 16 points. Your net loss now is -13. You made it worse, not better. This is the big problem with promising things you cannot deliver on, and especially if they perceive you lied on purpose, that you intentionally deceive them, then the deception becomes another multiplier. That's more negative points. If they believe you were just making promises with no knowledge one way or the other, if you could do it, that's a negative. But if they feel like you intentionally deceived them, that's huge. That could be all the way to a -4, which goes then -5 times 4, -20. And that could be in addition to the hope deferred. So you have to understand how that works. And this is part of why people, they think they're getting free points, and they are oblivious to what it's costing them. Oblivious. Because they make their excuses. Excuses are people giving themselves permission. And because they make their excuses, and the worst excuses sometimes people make is they find a way to blame you. A mother I was talking to one time, she had been promising her child Disneyland. When it finally came time, it was the week before the trip. They know we're not going. I said, why aren't we going? We've been talking about this for months. She says, well, because we can't stay in the Disneyland hotel like you like. And this goes, I never said anything about the Disneyland hotel. I thought we were just doing a day trip. Well, I know you really want to stay at the Disneyland hotel, and we can't afford that. Blaming the girl for something she never asked for, something she didn't even expect, and canceling the whole thing. Now, I don't know where you live, if you're listening to this, but for us, Disneyland is about a 2-hour drive. And that's what, ordinary traffic. You happen to have clean traffic, you can be there in a little over an hour and a half. Doesn't happen very often between here and Anaheim, but it can happen. And so it's commonly done as a day trip. People pack up in the morning, head up there, spend the day there, come back at the end of the day. That's normal. And that's what the girl expected. And that's what the parent did. Blamed her. Now, what do you think that did to that girl's heart? Hope deferred makes the heart sick. But having your own hope deferred, and then you're being blamed for it, that doubled up. And by the way, that girl, I talked to her again when she was an adult, still remembered that. That was a massive anchor point too. I cannot trust my mother. I will not put my heart in my mother's hands again because that's what she does. And that moment was her main anchor point to define her mother's behavior. And to make it worse, her mother, reinforced that interpretation again and again and again. So with anticipation in general, when you're doing positive anticipation, even when you're doing proper positive anticipation, you have to be careful. You have to try to be understanding that if you over-anticipate, it could flip because of disappointment. If you're anticipating a 4 and you get a 3, you're still going to get your +3, but the -1 you anticipated that didn't come, that -1 you didn't anticipate or you made the mistake on, that's going to turn into a -4, and that could end up making the whole trip disappointing. So you have to be as realistic as you can about your anticipation, because when things don't play out the way you want, the level of disappointment can create a negative association to the event, and therefore to the person you were relying on to make that event you were anticipating. So you need to be careful of these kind of things. So when you anticipate, hold your anticipations loosely and be ready to drop some of them. Now, does it lighten the emotional value of them? Yes, of course it does. But what you're doing is you're making sure you're dodging the future negative. And so when you're doing anticipation, enjoy the anticipation, and just instead of taking, say a we'll say you're anticipating awesome, a +4. Go ahead and hold that at about half. Now, here's the thing. If you under-anticipate, you lose the bonus points beforehand, but you keep all of your points of the actual experience. And so slightly under-anticipating is better than over-anticipating. Now, memory is also worth about 1/8. So when you had a great experience, reflect on it. When you had a great time, think about it again. Get in there. Talk about it. Use your memory anchors if you got pictures of it. If you bought souvenirs while you were there. Try to break it out into pieces so you can de-chunk that. And say if you can de-chunk that to 8 separate things, you can actually get a whole extra point by the way you de-chunk that. And so instead of thinking about, oh, wow, we had this thing happen. I recently had a car wreck. Is the car wreck a plus or a minus? The wreck itself is a minus. Here's part of the pluses I'm looking at. I was alone in my car. I see that as a plus. No one else had to go through that with me. Had Dawn been in the car with me, that would have really hurt her neck. So I'm grateful she wasn't with me. It took hours to get help on the side of the freeway. I see that as another plus. No one else had to sit in 107-degree weather with me. No one else had to go through the process of putting in the claim, getting the tow truck, getting the rental, getting the car in the body shop, hundreds of miles from home. No one else had to go through that with me. I handled it on my own. The insurance coverage was enough to cover it. We had the comp and collision, so that we're going to be covered on that. We had the liability, so the car that I ran into is going to be covered on that. We had the technology so that we could just take the pictures of everyone's ID and take the pictures of everyone's insurance card and take pictures of everyone's car and everyone's license plate number. So we actually have all the information. We don't have to worry about, did I write it down right? Well, I have a photograph. I have an actual photograph of the insurance card. I don't have to worry if I wrote it down right. Because I had a cell phone, I could file my claim from the side of the road. I didn't have to, hitchhike miles down the road to try to get to a phone somewhere like it might have had to in my grandparents' day or my father's day even. And so I see that as a plus, a plus, a plus, a plus, a plus, a plus, a plus. So overall, my emotional feeling from the accident is pretty neutral. And I'm grateful for all the plus pieces. Now, I haven't gotten the call as to how much it's going to be and whether or not my car is going to be totaled, and so we don't have all the play out. But so far for where it is right now, my emotion about it is pretty neutral. We're just taking care of it. And it's because that intense negative experience is balanced out by all the things I choose to see as a plus. And so when I think about the accident, did you just hear in my voice that where I focus first is the fix? And that's the way I remember it, so that way the accident itself doesn't keep stacking negative associations to me. Now, at some point in every relationship, there's a 0 point. When you initially meet someone, when you meet someone that's a positive experience, sometimes even when you see someone, you hear about them for the first time, or you read a book about them, whatever it is, someone talks about them, you begin to develop opinions. Now, no relationship is always going to be positive. So there'll be ups and downs and some of the downs. But so long as it's generally going up, we will perceive it as a good relationship. If it begins negative, we will have a tendency to try to minimize that relationship. How many people have ever had a negative experience at the doctor's office or a negative experience at the dentist's office, or at least things you interpret as negative? And if that initial experience is negative, is there a tendency to want to go more or want to go less? What if you have an amazing hygienist who cleans your teeth and does a fantastic job because you happen to go see Dawn? Well, you can be looking forward to your teeth cleanings because she's magnificent. You get a chance to meet this beautiful human being, not just physically beautiful, although that's obviously true, but someone who just comes and cleans your teeth with this amazing, I'm loving you with cleaning teeth type love. And you get a good job, it's done well, you get checked out by a doctor who honors and respects your time and really wants to take care of you, isn't looking for, well, how much money can I extract out of your mouth? And then it becomes a much more positive experience. and then you want to go back to there. Now, if you have a negative experience with one dentist and you don't think that's all dentists, then you're not going back to that dentist again. You're going to go looking for another dentist. So you see some of how that works. Now, remember, because negative is 4 times more powerful than positive, what happens if you have a good relation that's going up and then something really bad happens? If it does not cross this 0 point, you can still have a good relationship and keep it going. But what if that's your 0 point, you grew the relationship and it had a crash. You're rebuilding the relationship, it had another crash. You're building the relationship again and it had another crash, and now it's gone below the 0 point. You're trying to keep this relationship so you can continue to try to build it, as another crash. Maybe you continue to build, and you get it back into positive territory, you think it's going, and then you have another huge crash. Relationships that stay in negative territory do not last. Relationships that stay in positive territory, people always look forward to. Now, for a relationship status, which is different than the relationship itself, people have different tolerances for negative. So for a casual acquaintance, like a store, a coworker, whether or not you're just going to sit down and chat with this person or not, doesn't really matter one way or another. At church, whether you want to visit with a particular person, if it's just anywhere in the negative territory, it's perfectly okay to not have to spend time with someone you have a negative relationship with. Now, some relationships, no matter how negative they go, it can crash beyond what you thought was humanly possible, but it's your kid. When does it stop being your kid? You say, that's it, I'm breaking up with you, I am not your parent anymore. Generally, it doesn't happen. I know there's some parents that will sign off on the parental rights and whatnot, but for someone who's actually parenting a child that is burning down the relationship, if anyone's ever heard of one of those teenagers, they can burn down the relationship, and there's nothing but agape and an absolute committed, stubborn determination. I am not letting go of my child, that lets that parent continue to maintain relationship with that child. I mean, my mother, talking about this concept, said, if you ever got so bad that you actually murdered someone, because there was something in the news where someone had murdered someone, and he ran to his house and his mother hid him, tried to hide him from police. My mother said, if that was you, I would turn you in. Because it is important to me that you understand right and wrong, and your mother is not going to back you up on wrong. Then I come visit you every day in prison because, I'm your mom and I love you. And what she was telling me is, I could crash that to the worst negative imaginable, and she will still be there for me. And she will still be the mom. I'm not going to reward you for behaving wrong. So, I'm going to report you to the police. But I'll come visit you, and I'll try to keep building up that relationship, even if you're mad at me for turning you in. Which I guess is also the warning. If I ever do kill someone, don't go getting the mom, because she's going to turn me in, right? But she says, what's right and what's wrong is bigger than that relationship. But some people have different tolerances for the negative. So when you hear someone say that, we're getting divorced because, things changed. Well, that's like a -1 tolerance for a marital status. When someone says, we're just not in love anymore. That could be a -1, -2. Where they need this constant positive feeding. Now, if someone says, I'm getting divorced because, he's an alcoholic and it's destroying our family. That might be a -5 tolerance. On the other hand, you might get someone, and I'm using a slightly different scale on this, just so you know. You might have someone who won't leave no matter what. Say, yes, I know he's murdered 2 of our children. Yes, I know he's been in prison. Yes, I know he's hospitalized me 7 times. But I love him. And the church says I should stay. He never cheated on me. I was told if he doesn't cheat on me, I can't leave him. There's nothing in the Bible that says I'm allowed to divorce him if he kills one of my kids. There's nothing in the Bible that says I can divorce him if he beats me. So I'm going to stay. Because I'm terrified of being alone. You get that sometimes too. I've had conversations with criminal prosecutors who have this incredible level of frustration with these people that continue to stay with their abusers at the risk of their children, and have even removed children from the parents because of the risk. And the mother, in the particular case we were talking about, says, but I've never touched my children. Says, but you insist upon keeping them with someone who does. But I would never do that. We're not saying you did. You're leaving them in danger. That's why we have to take them away. And the mother was perfectly, fine, allowed to see her children, so long as he wasn't around, because he was the one abusing, but she refused to leave him. So into this relationship equation, let's look at the relationship quantifier. And all the relationship quantifier is, it's a scale from -10 at the worst through a 0 up to a +10. A 0 means you're pretty ambivalent about it. Doesn't really matter to you one way or the other. Pretty much every human being you've never met and don't know, you're at a 0. Why? Because you've never met him, you don't know. But you can actually have interaction with someone and you really don't care one way or the other. That to you, they're just the role they fulfill. It's just the cashier. You don't know who this person is. You don't care who the person is. Your only interaction with them is you're the cashier. You're the voice on the phone. You're the person behind the counter. You're the driver in the other car. I don't need to know who you are. I'm only interacting with you in some role you occupy. That'd be a 0 relationship. A -10 relationship is about as bad as you can imagine. That's like ready to kill somebody. That's being afraid you're going to get killed by somebody. That is someone that you are so terrified of or furious with on such a persistent basis, you can't imagine any human relationship being worse than that. A +10 is a relationship that is so positive, so thrilling, so exciting to you, you can't imagine it being any better. And by the way, when you get up to about a +8, this +8 to +10 range is very difficult to sustain. That needs constant positive feeding in order to sustain an 8 to 10 level relationship. So that's the kind of level relationship we're talking about here. So 0 is ambivalent, and +8 to +10 is really awesome. So look at +8 as like a great relationship, and a +10 is like an awesome to the edge of belief relationship. That, a typical, I really like this person, he's a friend, he's a buddy, figure, you might be looking at a 4 to 5. There's someone you're building a relationship with that you really enjoy being around. Maybe a typical marriage where it's a good marriage. You really like your spouse. It might not be stunning, it might not be staggering, you might not be racing to get home and just hoping to have time alone together and hoping to have time to go spend time together and just coveting all of that and craving it with them. That'd be in the 8 to 10, maybe even the 9 to 10 range. But, that's a good marriage. I love my partner. I love spending time together. I love our family time. I love our date night. I love our chat time. That's probably a 6 to 7 range. A lot of like, we get along. We love each other. And, nothing all that bad. You might put that in the 1 to 3 range. Or we'll make it a 2 to 3 range. And kind of a -1 to a +1. It's like, Yeah, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. Mostly it's just okay. And sometimes it's okay goodish, sometimes it's okay baddish. And then when you start getting down into these negatives, then your relationships obviously are getting worse. And some people have different levels of tolerance for where things have to change for them. For some people, it's like, I just do not have any place for negativity in my life. Now, there was a man that I had talked to, him and his wife. He was responsible for building the business. That was his job. And she was responsible for taking care of the home. That was her job. That's the way they had decided to divide up the responsibilities of the married couple. And one of the things they had agreed to, with some coaching and mentoring from his mentor and his mentor's wife, who talked to the wife, and said, now, if he's going to do this, we're going to push him, we're going to stretch him. He is going to need 100% backup on this. And the wife agreed. Well, at one point, he's going to go meet with a hot prospect, an important prospect, someone where it's not quite make it or break it, where if I don't get this contract, the business is over, we're doomed. But one of those, if I can make this work, this is the one that's going to finally put us over the edge. This is the one where we finally break through. And the wife, as simple a thing as just made a comment of, I don't know about that guy. He doesn't really seem like he's going to go for it to me. I don't know how well we can count on him. And he paused, and he looked at her like, I thought you wanted to succeed. And she caught herself. She ended up talking to, I think, the mentor's wife after that. And the mentor's wife says, like, don't ever do that again. Now, if you want to do that after the presentation, after he has the answer, okay. But not when he's on his way out the door to the meeting. If he walks in that door to meet with this guy to make the presentation, and he's got your voice echoing in the back of his head, I don't know about this guy. I don't know if he's going to go for it. And he doesn't show up with total confidence. The chances of success dropped off considerably. And the wife apologized for that. But sometimes, that's the tolerance. When he was pushing so hard, any negative could undermine him. Sometimes when you have a level of success that is beyond anything you could have had, the opportunity is right there. You get something called friction. And it's very easy to start picking at each other. In another venture that I was connected to, not a part of, but connected to, a great big golden door had just been thrown open to them. All they had to do was keep doing what they had done when they were at their best. All they had to do is just keep going. They didn't have to even step it up. They just had to not step it down. Well, what ended up happening? Well, they ended up stepping it down. So the great golden doors of opportunity were thrown open to them, and they ended up stepping it down. And a project like that had very low tolerance for negativity. Well, one of the people in the project subcontracted with some other people to try to get a sample done, got it done, and the other people on the team found out he did that. And some of them were pissed. Not just a little annoyed, confused, wondering, wanting to inquire and find out. They were pissed. And there was yelling, screaming, accusations, judgment. Completely destroyed the whole project. They got to the place. The great golden doors of opportunity are thrown open to them. The big time stuff right there. There's the path. And just as they were strolling, all they had to do was not stop, and they started really slow down. And they started to nip at each other. And then one person got frustrated, and he did an end run around the rest of his team. And then the team got upset. And the whole thing dissolved. Right in front of the great golden doors of opportunity. So this kind of thing happens. So when you're dealing with relationships, it doesn't always have to be marriages and friendships. You could be talking business relationships, business partnerships. How easy they are to blow apart because if you understand how the relationship quantifier works, if you understand how the Phileo bank account works, if you understand that when God said, hope deferred makes the heart sick, he was right. When God's talking about love and the importance of agape love, he was right. When God talks about phileo love, a brotherly love, he was right. And that he designed and he engineered by the Genesis 1:1 principle. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. God designed and engineered human beings to work a certain way. And it is the glory of God to conceal a thing, that the truth is there, and it is the glory of kings to uncover a thing. This is something else that God told us, is that you use your sovereign authority, your sovereignty as a human being to figure these things out, to learn these things and gain this wisdom and insight, and then to act accordingly, to behave accordingly. Now, different people will have different strategies for dealing with situations. I'll tell you, in my personal opinion, one of the worst strategies you can use is the sword. A better strategy you can use is a shield. I like putting a little cross on my shield. And one of the best strategies I think you can use a lot of times is just don't be there. So sometimes when people experience a negative, what they want to do is inflict a negative in return. You hurt me, I'm going to hurt you. You upset me, I'm going to upset you. You angered me, I'm going to hurt you for that. You hurt me, I'm going to make you angry. Whatever it is. I got a negative, you're getting a negative. And because negative is 4 times more powerful than positive, the negative on the behavior might have been, say, just a -1. And so I'm going to inflict 4 back. Well, if you have 2 people who do swords, then, I inflict 4 back. And so we're not even doing the +1 on this one. So you receive a 4, so then you do 16 back to me, and I get pissed off at you. And I'm going to come back and I'm going to nail you with, 64 in return. And you can see how that can destroy a relationship really fast. That can turn what was okay into a feud that could last for generations if you wanted to go all the way to the Hatfields and McCoys. And so always be careful of the sword. But very often someone who does the sword doesn't get in close relationship with someone else who does a sword because that tends to go bad really, really fast. So then you get someone who does the shield. And sometimes they'll try to minimize what happened. They'll make excuses for what happened. They'll try to compensate for the sword and try to make excuses to, it's okay for that person to use a sword because, I messed up. And they'll take the responsibility for their own heart at the shield level. And very often you get these sword and shield people will get connected to one another. And sometimes you get like the passive swords, where they're going to throw the sharp things down on the ground for you to step on while trying to put down. I didn't do anything. But they really are being mean. They're being passive-aggressive. And you have to deal with that, too. Sometimes it's just better to just avoid it. Just adjust the relationship. So if it's a family member, just adjust the relationship. If you still have to see them at Thanksgiving and Christmas, it's fine. See them at Thanksgiving and Christmas. You don't have to hang out with them all the time. And even when you see them at Thanksgiving and Christmas, you don't have to sit down next to them and spend your whole time talking to them. You'll sit down next to someone you do get along with and spend most of your time talking to them and just be polite to the other people. But even when you're dealing with marriage relationships, sometimes the simplest solution is just avoid the problem. If you know this is not going to change, just avoid it. So if you know that you married someone who is constantly late, and this one was funny because I know a woman, she married 2 men in a row that were constantly late. Whatever time he said he would be there, you had to kind of determine, and this was the funny thing. She actually had a formula. You could ask her, so if it's a sporting event or a business meeting, if he said I'll be there at 3, expect him around 3:15. For a business meeting. If it was for a social event, expect him anywhere from 1 to 4 hours late. Well, what does that mean that she knows? She knows he's going to be late. Well, eventually that relationship ended, and she remarried. Well, guess who she married? Someone else who's late. Someone else who says, I'm on my way home, I'll see you by 6. Shows up at 6:15. Well, she got mad. I was actually witnessing this one time, and I thought it was kind of funny because I've actually listened to exactly this before. I'm listening to her rag on him and thinking, wait, I heard her say almost exactly these same words, almost like she pulled out the script from an old movie with her previous husband. And I listened, and she ended up using the previous husband's name because she's using an old script. Well, he got mad, and he, stormed out of the room. And that precipitated a discussion with her saying, I've heard you use that script before. I don't know if you realize you've used that script before in front of me. I've heard that before. Now, your first husband, maybe you didn't know that. This one, I know you knew that because we had talked about that before you got married. Is he going to change? The man is in his 60s. He has been late his entire life. Is he going to change? He says, no, and it's just so frustrating. Okay, he is not going to change. You have to let it go. He's not going to be different than he's been his entire life. And even if he was going to change, do you suppose he's going to be standing there and thinking, well, honey, I'm really pretty committed to my being late thing, but because you yelled at me, because you called me your ex-husband's names, I've decided I want to change. No, probably not. If he does change, and this is your big danger here, if he does change because he is sick and tired and fed up of being treated that way, every time he's on time is a negative in the relationship, so long as he's negatively motivated. So imagine if he's saying like, I got to be on time, or my wife's going to just tear into me again. And then he shows up on time. She's like, hey, he's on time. She's happy. If he walks in the door with that -1, yeah, I'm on time because I'm fed up with hearing you just gripe all the time. And she has no idea what it's costing her every single time he's on time because he just doesn't want to be griped at. I might have no idea her whole relationship is disintegrating from him being on time because the only reason he's on time is he's fed up. That's scary? So even if you can use negative techniques to motivate someone so that they're afraid to do something, they're doing it because they're angry, they're fed up with something, so they're doing something, compliance can be a negative. And by the way, that's a parenting principle too. The only reason your children are behaving is because they're afraid that you're going to beat them with the penalty stick, whatever it is. The only reason that they're behaving is they don't want to get yelled at and screamed at and cussed out. The only reason they're behaving is they don't want to get abused. Every time they behave in order to avoid the abuse is a negative in the relationship. And you can talk to some people who grew up that way, grew up over-controlled, grew up in a chaotic, even a dangerous or at least emotionally dangerous household. They'll tell you that every day, even when they were behaving to placate a wild, out-of-control parent, maybe a drunk parent, maybe an incredibly immature parent, it was damaging the relationship. That they had this kind of neurotic desire to please them enough to don't treat me badly. This almost neurotic, even sometimes bordering on psychotic desire to get some positive feedback. But their actual compliance isn't motivated by love or character. The actual compliance is motivated by a negative. And so when they comply out of fear, when they comply out of anger, it's actually destroying the relationship. Now, one last thing before I close this out. And, of course, feel free to have private discussions about the particulars and how this might apply into one or more of your own relationships. Back to the relationship quantifier. I heard a bizarre thing one time. Someone used a different kind of relationship quantifier, just like a 1 to 10 scale or a 0 to 10 scale, where the 1 was really, really bad and the 10 was really, really good. And what he said is that the wife usually has a much more realistic view of the relationship than the husband, since husbands usually don't have a clue. That's actually not true. That's wrong. What is true is that the wife and the husband have different experiences of the relationship. So the wife might be at a 7, and the husband might really be at a 10. So in a husband-wife scenario, there was a husband and wife where he was getting all the sex he wanted. He was happy. That's all he wanted out of the relationship is give me sex and otherwise leave me alone. And that was pretty much his deal. So what's happening is he's getting his deal is being met. What he was oblivious to, he thought we are okay because I'm okay. But he continued to ignore and or mistreat his wife, continued to make promises he wouldn't keep, would judge her, would be passive-aggressive with her, and worse, would take even her attempts to improve the relationship, flip it on her as a weapon, and use it in her social circles to show how bad she was. Her relationship is sitting like a -4, and it's going down, probably heading toward a -7. And if he's not careful, it could get to that -10, and someone's going to get seriously injured. And he was oblivious because he had his 10, and he didn't care. Now, if you asked him intellectually in his head, he could have told you this was going on. But he didn't care. She wasn't important enough to him for him to care. Is anyone surprised that that relationship eventually deteriorated until it ended? No one should be surprised. So, it could go as far as one person's incredibly happy and one person is just losing it. And they're about done. And you have no idea sometimes they're about done because, your side's okay. Another thing that can happen, because both of you can have separate relations, it doesn't have to be that extreme. That kind of extreme is incredibly rare. First off, most partners don't have the kind of character that says, I will do my part as a spouse, whether you do yours or not. Very few people have that kind of character. Very few people will stand before God and say, God, my behavior as a wife, my behavior as a husband is independent of my spouse's behavior. That nowhere in Scripture do I take permission from you that if my partner doesn't fulfill their part of the deal, that I give myself permission to not do my part. That so long as I am a wife, I will do my best to do wife. So long as I am a husband, I will do my best to do husband. I will be imperfect. It will be hard. I may not always nail it, but I will continue to make that effort. I will not give myself permission to stop so long as I have the status. Very few people can do that. So you will rarely have, the kind of wild negative to wild positive kind of disparity. And very rarely also will you have a partner whose needs are so simplistic that, so long as you're giving them, pleasure and leaving them alone, that, they're happy. I mean, most people want, like a relationship in their relationships. But some people, I don't care about you as a human being. You're just a pleasure object for me. So, you just be my sex toy, and I'll be happy with you. And just like a sex toy, I kind of expect, to, stick you in the closet when I'm done with you and only pull you out when I want you. And that was kind of, the level of regard, honestly, that man had for his wife. But, it's always one of those things where you hope that someone, grows up and they get better, or maybe at least they find a relationship that's more compatible with that. More commonly, what you'll have is maybe a 2 to 4 point disparity. You usually won't have 15-point disparity, where one person is having a relationship at about an 8, the other one's maybe about a 6. Maybe someone's kind of going, it's okay, it's maybe a 4, and someone else might be at a 0. That's more common. And so it's not that one has a better grasp of the relationship than the other. Each side knows what their side of the relationship is like. And because of that, you have to try to be careful about the negatives being created. Some of you have to be very careful about the negatives being fed into a relationship. And that's also part of why just that don't be there. Get out of the way. Let the person get out of the way. There's something that goes on a lot called lawful target. Well, lawful target would be if I'm doing it is like, well, because my wife is my wife and because she can't easily leave me, she's a lawful target. I'm allowed to be mean to her. I'm allowed to be the worst thing in her life because she can't go anywhere. Kids do this with parents sometimes, right? Sometimes parents do this with their kids. You can't go anywhere. You see it more often between siblings. So therefore, it's okay if I shove you away because you can't leave. Some people go even worse. They don't even give the person the safety valve. Where I could be yelling and screaming at my wife, which I was almost going to say never do, but that may not be true, which I rarely do, and demand that she stay and let me keep hurting her. She could get up and start walking out that door, and I will physically block her because I'm not done yelling at her. And there are some people that take lawful target that far. Well, not only do I take permission to attack, but I demand that you stay here and take it. And that if you dare get out of the way, I'm going to be ticked off at you for not staying there and taking it. Now, the metaphor I use here is martial arts. Suppose I take a swing at my wife. Now, my wife, she's a third-degree black belt. She can block most things. But suppose, I'm getting to the point where I'm hurting her, and all she wants to do is step back, get out of the way. And I get ticked off at her for stepping out of range where I can't punch her anymore. You say, obviously, that's insane. And yet we do it with words all the time. And it is stunning to me to watch people do that. To demand that their target stand there and take it, and not even give them a way out. Not even allow them to step out of range. Not even allow them, for both sides, to calm down, chill, so we can have a conversation about it and see if we can fix this. So you get that too. So all of these dynamics, if you understand the mechanics of it, more often women understand, intuitively some of these things. Breaking it out this way, though, a lot of times you see women go, oh, wow, I never realized that. That never occurred to me. Generally speaking, tends to be more of a revelation to men. That when they can see it broken out so cleanly, they go, oh, okay. I think I see what's going on now. And then you can strategize. You can restructure, and you can figure out what you're going to do about it, if anything. If anything. And sometimes, and this is one of the big things to always keep in mind, sometimes you need to restructure the relationship. Sometimes it can be as simple as there's just certain subjects you just don't talk about. Now, one of my professions as a lawyer, there's attorney-client confidentiality, so there's obviously secrets that I am obliged to keep. As a pastor, there's pastor the clergy confidentiality requirements. And so, again, there might be often secrets that, I'm accustomed to keeping. And so sometimes they're just stuff you just don't talk about. Sometimes it's for, legal reasons. A friend of mine is a doctor, and he and his wife never talk about the patients. Why? Because, doctor-patient confidentiality. And so there's places where you just don't, and you don't for legal reasons. But sometimes there's places you just don't for relational reasons. That there's just certain sore points that we can't talk about this. Certain subjects that you just know you can't bring up, maybe for a season, because you're in a season of high stress. And you just kind of need to limit the field of what each one has to deal with. Sometimes there's certain things there is never a way for us to navigate this without it turning into a problem. You just take care of your side, I'll take care of my side. And part of where we ran into one of these was the wife would usually take care of the household bills. She paid the bills. But the husband also had access to the account. And if he needed money, he would go to the ATM and he'd get out a couple $100 and then forget to tell her. So then she's writing out all of the checks to pay the bills, and then all of a sudden, 1 month, a whole bunch of checks come back. Why? Because he went to the store or the ATM, he took out a couple $100 twice that month. She had $400 less than she thought she had, and the first check she wrote was the big one. And that pushed it up toward the top, and a whole bunch of little checks, $15, $20, $45 checks, all bounced in rapid succession because she did not know $400 was missing from the account. So the solution ended up being simple. And by the way, part of the reason there was less than he thought there was, is she had gone shopping, and she had spent some of the money from that account. Well, he had also gone shopping, and he spent some of the money from the account. Well, she thought she knew how much there was because she was in charge of the account. He thought he knew there was plenty because he's the one who puts the money in the account. So all they did in that case is they restructured so that there's a our account, and then there's a his account, and there's a her account. Neither one of them would take money out of the our account for either his expense or her expense. She would have money in her account for her to spend any way she wanted, didn't have to check with anybody. He would have money in his account. He could spend any way he wanted, didn't have to check with anybody. And this protected the household bills. This structure stopped a bill check from ever bouncing ever again. And look at what all this is. It's a simple restructuring of their relationship. Now, what if someone gets mad? Well, why should we have separate accounts? We're married. We should have one account. So, yeah, but you're bouncing checks in one account. So this was like a financial restructure. We'll have 3 accounts. So out of my account, I can spend the money. I don't have to worry. And then, if I go to the ATM to get $200, and it says you don't have $200, all right, well, then I'll get whatever's there. All right, I'll take $120. Now, if she goes shopping to the store and she knows, okay, well, I've got $800 in my account, I could spend up to $800. And never again did they bounce a check because one or the other, or what happened that 1 month, both of them spent the same money. Simple restructuring. Sometimes you restructure the issues that you interact with, the way you interact with them, whether or not you interact, how you talk about it. Some people find that we can't have a verbal discussion, that I react. It's too intense. But I can leave notes. I leave you notes, you leave me notes. We can do it by email. You send me an email, I'll send you an email. And if the email you get back came back too fast, and what's in the email doesn't look like I'm really addressing the problem, it looks more like I'm reacting to it, then send it back to me and ask, can you please think about this more and get back to me tomorrow, tonight, some other time. So you can change the way you interact on things. You can, literally change the structure. Do it by notes. Do it by emails. And it can be interesting sometimes when someone will be sitting down, one in one room, one in the other room, with an intermediary walking from room to room in between them, literally saying, okay, he says, by which I think he means. And then come out, okay, now she says, by which I think she means. And so, you could end up being an intermediary or needing an intermediary. Both of you might sit down and both of you talk to the counselor. You don't talk to each other, you talk to the counselor. And then let the counselor reflect it back. And you respond to the counselor. You don't even look at each other. Sometimes people need to do that. You need to communicate through indirect means so that you can get away from an issue. And sometimes you just need to understand the relationship restructure might be an ending. It could be a divorce if it's a marriage. It could be the end of a friendship. It could be quitting a job. It could be firing an employee. It could be just realizing your child never wants to see you again. And your entire relationship with them might be, Christmas cards and birthday cards. And if they will not block you, monitoring things on their Facebook post. And that could be it. Sometimes things end. Sometimes the whole thing doesn't have to end. Some people are all or nothing. It's all or nothing. But sometimes it's over. And sometimes it's too late to fix. And sometimes that's a hard thing to understand too. That there's too much damage done. And especially someone has a high tolerance for negative, where you need a positive to get together, but it took a strong negative before you ended it. If someone's negative tolerance was, say, a -7, but to initiate a relationship, they needed to be at least a +1, and they didn't leave until it broke that to a -8, you might have to understand you are never going to have a chance to gain those 9 points. It's over. Because you can't get back together unless you get those 9 points back. And because it burned down to a -8, you will never have that chance. And that happens sometimes too. And it's tough. And forgiveness doesn't always fix it. That's something else that's tough too. Someone can forgive me for what I did, but if they expect it to continue, they will still stay away. So let's go back to that physical hitting example that makes it so insanely, blatantly obvious it's impossible to not see. So if I'm constantly taking swings and I clock my wife upside the jaw, and finally she says, that's it, I'm fed up with it. I'm not having this relationship with you anymore. And she backs away from the relationship. And I know in order for me to rebuild our marriage relationship, I need to give her a hug. And she totally forgives me for all the times I hit her. All those times, we're talking physically here to make it obvious, but it could be the words. It could be going after her sore points. It could be judging. It could be whatever I did that kept on hurting her. But what's closer, hug range or slug range? In order to get to hug range, she has to feel safe enough to pass through that slug range. She might forgive me for every single time I ever slugged her, but not trust that I won't hit her again. Is she going to stay in range or out of range? She's going to stay out of range. You say, I know you do this, and I have not seen evidence you have changed. And even if I did see evidence you would change, I would step in very, very carefully, because I still can't trust it until I see it tested under stress. And I would never be able to get to that hug range, because she would know that stepping into slug range is idiotic. And so this is something that we also have to realize about trying to fix relationships. So if I know in order to restore my marriage relationship, I have got to get at least to that +1. I've got to get to that hug. But say the slug, and we'll assume it doesn't really hurt her, it doesn't damage her as far as needing medical attention. But boy, does it hurt! It's painful, and that slug range, that she will never come close enough for me to get better than that -2. Our relationship at best will be a very polite -3, and I can't get my wife back if I can't get to the +1, and I have closed that path. Because she could not trust I'm not going to do that to her again. And that I would have to get from -2 to -1 to 0 to +1. Even if she's courageous enough to step in there, remember what I said about the negative feelings connected to positive behavior? She might say, okay, I'm going to give him a chance, and she's scared the whole time, and every time I move fast, she's ready to protect herself, she's ready to pull up that shield. She could be sitting at the -2 I think we're building up, and she's actually sliding away. So we have to understand relationships get there. Now, this isn't to tell you there's no hope. This is to warn you, you can push it to the level where there's no hope. And some people forget that. Protect what you have. Build what you can. And accept that what is. That's phileo. And that's a phileo bank account. That's a relationship quantifier. And the better you understand these things while you still have opportunity, the better you can make all of your relationships. Thank you.